Hello, Petal. How you doing? Hopefully there's not going to be a big gap at the start of this one, so I do apologise for the last one. I have got no clue how that happened, but thank you for still listening. I do appreciate you, and thank you for coming back for every chapter. You're seen, you're appreciated, and you're all awesome. So today we're going to do Chapter 5, Life, Liberty and the Pursuit of Sausages, J.W. Wells & Co., Book 7. In advance, please excuse any hoarseness or huskiness. There is something else going on behind the scenes. Don't worry about. Aside from the hay fever, but we've got this. We will make it work. But as ever, if you could hit the like button, it does help a lot. Same as hitting the notifications bell. If you want to share and subscribe, awesome. If you don't, that's cool. If you just want to keep coming back and listening, that's all right. But if you want to subscribe as well, that's fantastic. It's free and it helps the channel. I digress. So, Chapter 5 of Life, Liberty and the Pursuit of Sausages, J.W. Wells & Co., Book 7. Okay. Ever since Don was a small child, he'd had this recurring nightmare. It was Christmas. The pub was shut for the day, and the whole family was gathered around the tree. Mum and Dad were handing out presents, some for Polly and some for him. Polly's presents all had little labels on, from Mum and Dad, from Aunt Jane with love, the usual, and when she opened them they were all in their proper as seen on TV packaging, with the maker's name prominently displayed on the carton. But his presents had no labels, and as soon as he ripped them out of their glossy wrapping, he could tell there was something wrong with them. No packaging, no plastic blister packs, nothing to say that batteries were not included. They were old-fashioned, crude. They looked, he could feel tears of disappointment and anger burning in the corners of his eyes, home-made, or if not actually that, then not made in a proper factory, by machines. Well, of course not, said his mother. They're made by Santa's elves. At the North Pole, added his father. Don't be stupid, he snapped peevishly. There's no elves. The North Pole's nothing but snow and ice. I saw it on David Attenborough. Santa's not real. Mum and Dad looked at each other nervously. Then Dad said, Well, actually, something in his tone of voice, perhaps. Or maybe it was loads of tiny snippets of evidence rejected over the years by his conscious mind, but gradually building up in his subconscious till they reached an unsustainable level. Anyhow, he knew. Everybody, his sister, the other kids at school, even the teachers, had been deliberately lying to him all these years. There genuinely was a Father Christmas. Santa Claus existed. At that point in his dream, he'd burst into hysterical sobs and wake up falling sharply and reassuringly into a world where E equaled MC squared, and where to every action there was an equal and opposite reaction. Even though he knew at that moment that it had all been a ghastly nightmare, even so, the relief, the glorious realisation that it wasn't true, always filled him with joyous gratitude, together with a renewed determination not to have rich food and black coffee after 9 o'clock at night. Today, he woke up, opened his eyes, and stared at the silent alarm clock beside his bed. 8 a.m. He blinked at it. He believed in the existence of 8 a.m., but only in the sense that he believed in Alpha Centauri. It was out there somewhere, but he'd never lived to go there. And remembered. Oh, God, he moaned. Yesterday, here in this very flat, his home, magic had happened. He had done magic. A lifetime of rational scepticism had gone gurgling down the toilet. He could almost hear sleigh bells. Imagine the feelings of a dead atheist as he gazes into the smirking face of St. Peter. He cringed. It was all so bitterly unfair. Out there, in the world, He knew there were millions of poor, credulous, benighted fools who'd give anything for the knowledge that was burning him up like refluxed acid. And what next? If there was magic, where was the line to be drawn? Aliens? The Loch Ness Monster? How about the Tooth Fairy? They couldn't actually force him to believe, could they? Nor need. He'd seen for himself. Existence as he'd known it was over. All he could do was pick himself up and start again. He'd start, he decided, by putting on his underpants. He opened the drawer. An arm, sleeved in white samite, reached out and handed them to him. He jumped, a crane fly doing a Basil Fawlty impression, and his back hit the wall. He stared. The hand, slender, pale, feminine, was perfectly still, with his pants ironed, he couldn't help noticing, and neatly folded, draped over its palm like a posh waiter's white cloth. But his pants nonetheless. Present from his mother, birthday before last. Mum, he thought, there's a strange lady in my underwear drawer. He thought about that. Well, for one thing, a very brave strange lady, and presumably not afflicted by claustrophobia. He cleared his throat nervously and mumbled, "Hello." Then he thought, no, not possible. What's the cubic capacity of a pants drawer, even when it's empty? Say a metre by half a metre by 20 centimetres? In his weakened state, the mental arithmetic was too much for him, but it was not a lot. Not enough for a whole human body, not even if cut up and squished in. But then, he added quickly, it would be dead, in which case it couldn't pass me my pants. Not, oh God, without magic. No reply. One of those strong, silent, disjointed magic arms. No, that one was obvious. Of course it couldn't answer him, unless, of course, the head, larynx and lungs were in his sock drawer. That was a possibility. He didn't feel up to investigating straight away. That said, he needed his pants. How frail is our grip on our lives. How easy it is for a determined supernatural terrorist to hold us hostage. Deprive a man of his underwear and you've got him pinned down. Even if he's brave enough or scared enough to run out into the street in his pyjamas, he won't get far, and he knows it. Don had no illusions about his mental fortitude. Faced with a choice between embarrassment and arrest on the one hand, and the other hand, magic, clad in white samite, holding his boxes, there was only one way he could go. Very slowly, like a nervous city dweller in a red shirt approaching a bull, he edged forward, snatched the pants off the hand's extended palm, and shot back up against the wall, breathing hard. "Thanks," he heard himself mutter. The hand snaked back inside the drawer, which slid quietly shut. Just as the sock drawer crawled open, another hand, also in white samite, but this time fringed with a tasteful lace cuff, rose out of it like a snake, holding a pair of socks. Maybe it took pity on him. It lobbed the socks with an easy underarm throw. He fumbled the catch, retrieved the socks, and fled to the bathroom, bolting the door behind him. "You do realise," said a voice in his head, as he perched on the edge of the bath and hyperventilated, "that it's trying to be helpful, saving you trouble. It's somehow sensed that you're an idle git, too lazy to get dressed in the morning unless you absolutely have to, so it's helping out, like sort of Jeeves." "Yes," Don countered. "That's fine. On balance, though, a some assembly required Jeeves that jumps out at me from inside the furniture isn't really an improvement on my quality of life. Nice thought, but no thanks." "Don't tell me that," replied the voice. "Tell it." Well, he could see the logic in that approach, he supposed. He put on the pants and socks, wrapped himself comprehensively in his toweling robe, and went back into the bedroom. The sock drawer had closed again, but he didn't feel inclined to get any closer to it than he really had to. Instead, he said in a very loud and clear voice, "Excuse me." No reply. Naturally. See above. Yes, but just because it couldn't talk back didn't mean it couldn't hear or at least understand. "Excuse me," he repeated, "but if it's all the same to you, I'd really rather get my own clothes, thanks ever so much. Okay? Pause. If you can hear me, open a drawer or something. Nothing moved. That's a bit rude, he thought. Well, maybe it can't hear me after all. Maybe. But his situation now was, if anything, even worse than it had been. Whereas before he'd been in his pyjamas, now he was standing there wearing nothing but pants and socks. Escape simply wasn't an option. He inched towards the wardrobe, watching the line where the doors met like a hawk. He was no further than 2 feet away from it when the doors swung open and a hand, a third one, held out a hanger. His saved-for best jeans and his light blue shirt. Oh, he thought. To be fair, though, he'd taken and put on the underwear the other 2 hands had offered him, and nothing bad had happened. Maybe he was looking at this the wrong way. Admittedly, he didn't think that shirt and those jeans went at all well together, but he was perfectly prepared to admit that fashion sense wasn't one of his greatest assets. Not his strong suit. Oh, God. I will not crack up, he commanded himself. I am the captain of my soul, and if they want to break me, they won't do it by handing me my own clothes and my own bloody flat. On the contrary, I will be strong. I will take these clothes, put them on, check I look all right in the mirror, then leave the flat, run like buggery to the nearest travel agent, and book myself on the first available flight to Sumatra. My best jeans, he thought. My best shirt, now come to think of it. Best in the sense of least tatty, anyhow. Sod it, the Semite female is trying to tidy me up, like my mother, or a wife. The thought made him shudder. If he left the flat now, when he came back, would it be all neat and tidy, his stuff put away where he'd never be able to find it again, his comfortable, scruffy clothes bundled up in a black bin bag and spirited away? Jesus, he thought. Going to Sumatra was not the answer. He knew that. It was magic, for crying out loud. It couldn't be cheated of its prey by mere geography. It could follow him or bring him back. There was, he knew, only one course of action open to him. He took the hanger, went into the bathroom again, and got dressed. On his way back to the bedroom, the doors opened for him. Don't do that, he pleaded. They shut behind him too. Logic. If Samite Girl didn't have ears to hear him with, it followed that she didn't have eyes to watch him get dressed with. Indeed, bored in the presence of magic, logic is a chocolate frying pan and a Zimbabwean government stock. He slithered into his dressing gown, turned his back on the chest of drawers, and, hopping energetically on each leg in turn, put on his trousers. He had to doff the dressing gown to get inside his shirt, but he didn't mind that so much. He slid his keys off the bedside table and stuffed them into his trouser pocket. A hand reared up from under the bed, holding his shoes. The laces had been undone, and they'd been polished till they shone. A pity that, since they were trainers. He sat on the bed and dragged them on. Something touched the back of his head like a wasp, but noiseless and tugging gently. His hair was being combed. He thought, I wish I used an electric razor. I'm growing a beard, he said loudly, then counted to 10 under his breath. Nothing happened. He breathed a sigh of heartfelt relief, just as a white-sleeved hand shot out through the bathroom door and stuck his toothbrush in his mouth. He held perfectly still while the hand brushed his teeth. It seemed to be the sensible thing to do, he thought. I really need to go to the loo, but maybe I'd better not. To be fair to it, the hand proved to be quite competent with a toothbrush. Toilet paper, however, was another matter entirely. He weirded. When he'd said he was growing a beard, the hands had refrained from flying at his throat with the razor. That was reason to believe, surely, that if they were able to hear and understand him after all, also that they could be lied to, come to that, their earlier failure to obey or acknowledge. He thought about that, and the phrase "Nanny knows best" popped neatly into his mind like merchandise from a vending machine. Well, he thought, we'll see about that.
until such time as I can figure out how to make it stop, go away, leave me alone, I'm going to have to come to terms with it, sure, but I'm not going to smarten myself up. I'm not going to write my thank you letters, and I'm sure as hell not going to eat up my nice greens. You got that? He said aloud.
No reply. Something told him, however, that they had heard him just fine. There was that very faint but unmistakable tension quivering in the air, the sort he knew only too well from his childhood, the sort he'd been so very keen to get away from. This way to the battle of wills, it said to him, and he felt his muscles clench. He was a sort of man who'd rather bite off his own toe than get involved in scenes and melodrama, and ever since he'd escaped from the family nest, he'd done his best to design his life to be scene-proof and melodrama-free. All that, he had a nasty feeling, was about to change.
Oh well, he thought, back to the trenches.
He looked around the room, letting his eye rest in turn on all the dark and hidden places that had produced hands at him since he woke up. He cleared his throat, as though about to address a hostile board meeting.
Maybe, he said, we should sort out a few ground rules.
God, but he felt stupid talking to the furniture. Quite probably they were counting on that. He hardened his heart and his skin and went on.
Rule 1, no doing stuff for my own good, okay?
Nothing stirred, but that was all right. He'd tuned into the appropriate wavelength now. He knew the room was listening. Almost in the disposition of the furniture, the interplay of light and shadow, he thought he could make out an expression, a grim expression, corners of a metaphorical mouth turned down, eyes cold and hard, and was that the faint clicking of a virtual tongue? Never mind. He hated this sort of thing, but he was rather good at it.
Next, he said, I know you can hear me, so it's only good manners if you answer me when I talk to you. Well?
Reluctance. The room was
Rule 3, he said briskly. No sulking.
Had the curtains moved? He wasn't sure, but he didn't think so. It was just the shifting of the balance between light and shade as the sun went behind a cloud that gave the impression that the room was scowling at him.
Sorry, he said. I didn't quite catch that.
And then the room spoke to him. It was the creaking of floorboards, the groan of drawers not sitting perfectly square on their runners, the squeak of the hinge of a door overloaded by the weight of coats hung behind it, the flatulence of plumbing and central heating, the whimper of a chair as you stand up and the compressed foam rubber cushion reflates, the whistle of curtains on their tracks, the click of switches, the hum of a CPU fan. Blended together, a symphony of sounds so familiar they never heard. They said, yes. It was a moment or so before he realised what he'd heard, or that he'd heard anything at all. You know how sometimes you pick something up on the beach, a slightly different shape among the pebbles, and you can't immediately tell if it's just another small rounded stone or a human artefact smoothed and sanded and ground down by the infinite patience of the sea until it is virtually unrecognisable. To be on the safe side, he said, sorry? The room said, yes. Briefly, he found himself thinking, it was bad enough when I was talking to the room. This must be very bad indeed. But that sort of thing wasn't likely to help. So, baby's first word. Talking of which, all the experts stress the value of starting as you mean to go on.
Yes, what?
Maybe it was the room thinking, very slowly. Or maybe it was the pause while the unwilling speaker grits his teeth and forces himself to say the magic word. Yes, sir. He wasn't sure if he'd been expecting that or not. Anyway, it'd do.
That's better, he said. Now, the rules. Do we have an agreement?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Any questions?
Pause.
No, sir.
One step at a time, he told himself. We've established a dialogue, which is a major step and exactly what Captain Picard would have done. We can deal with attitude tomorrow, maybe.
So, he said, how does all this stuff work exactly? Do I get a specified number of wishes, or is it more open-ended?
The room seemed to shudder, as though at some ghastly lapse of protocol, and he decided he wasn't going to get an answer to that one. Pity. He took a deep breath and reformulated the question.
Is there a manual or a user's guide or anything like that? Only
a book lifted an inch off the bookshelf and flew at him across the room. He had to bat it away with his hand or it would have smacked him in the face. It fell, pages spread-eagled, on the floor, and he picked it up quickly before it could have another go at him. Not a book he'd seen before. It was thick enough, something in the order of 1,000 pages at a guess, and handsomely bound in red leather with loads of gold leaf. Unfortunately, it wasn't in English. Damned, in fact, if he knew what it was in. Instead of words made up out of letters, there were pictograms, squat, chunky, rather menacing symbols that reminded him of old-fashioned arcade game Space Invaders.
Ah, he thought. Like that, is it? Excuse me, he said. Is there a translation? No, sir. Sorry, sir.
At that he could feel his attitude starting to shift. It came, he later rationalised to himself, from the contrariness of his own nature. Magic, it appeared, was only doing what he himself would have done in his position, messing him about to make him go away because it didn't like him. That put a new complexion on the whole business. It was just like, he realised, the coffee frother. One of those little plastic battery-operated whisk things which had come free with something or other. Don was take it or leave it alone when it came to cappuccino and foamy hot chocolate and the like, but being able to concoct such things in his own kitchen was way down in the southern hemisphere of his list of priorities. Only just ahead of voting in local elections and dusting. But when he'd tried it, the coffee frother didn't work. Press button, no dice, nothing. So he'd taken the batteries out and put them back in again, making sure they were the right way around, and it still didn't work. So he'd opened the casing up and checked for visibly loose connections. And there weren't any, which left him with no alternative but to call the supplier of the something or other the coffee frother had come free with, who referred him to a distributor, who put him on to an importer, who turned out to have gone bankrupt 3 weeks earlier, but whose liquidators suggested he take the matter up with the manufacturer. By the time the trio finally went cold, he was on, oh, it's you again, terms with 4 different officials at the trade delegation at the Chinese embassy, and the first thing he had done after finally admitting defeat was go out and buy a proper coffee frother, one that actually went woo when you pressed the button. That, he'd long since acknowledged, was simply the way he was, and it was too late to do anything much about it now. Anybody could sell him anything, if only they knew about that aspect of his personality. Just tell him you can't have it, and immediately he could not live without one. First things first, however.
Magic, he said. Did you give me the last note of my jingle, or was it all my own work? Yes, sir.
He sighed. He was a patient man, but some coffee frothers come at too high a price. He was wondering whether he could be bothered to rephrase the question when his train of thought was derailed by a furious hammering at his door. It was his upstairs neighbour, the amateur guitarist, and he was obviously upset about something.
You, he snapped, what the hell are you doing in there?
Good question. Me? Nothing.
Balls, replied the guitarist. You're up to something all right. It's making the walls shake. There's plaster coming down off my ceiling.
Don smiled pleasantly.
Is that right?
Yes,
the guitarist replied, and Don thought of the evenings he'd spent with cotton wool stuck in his ears to protect him from the sound of his old favourite tunes being murdered. Also, now he came to think of it, when the guitarist wasn't being a guitarist, it was something to do with insurance.
You think it's funny, do you?
Go away,
Don thought, and he did. Don couldn't be sure whether the guitarist had just vanished, or whether a split second before he disappeared there'd been a sort of blurry shimmer and a very faint crackling noise. Not that it really mattered. The net effect was the same. One moment there'd been a stroppy loss adjuster standing in his doorway, and the next moment there was not. Don thought, this is quite bad. He found himself looking at the patch of carpet the guitarist had been standing on. No scorch marks, which was something. Next he glanced up and down the hall. Mercifully, no witnesses. Everything seemed to be happening very, very slowly, with the sound turned right down, but he was confident that was just plain ordinary natural shock, bewilderment and terror. He thought, I just killed someone. Did I just kill someone? But I can't have done, he reasoned, because if I'd killed someone, there'd be a body, and there isn't one. That's the whole point. He checked the carpet again just to make sure. No blood, no shriveled scraps of hair or skin. Well, he thought, if there's nothing to show, at least I can't prove anything. Wash your mind out with soap and water. A fellow human being has just been vanished. By magic. By me. And the important thing is to get him back as quickly as possible. That had to be possible. Surely? Oh, well, of course. He thought hard. Nothing happened. Now, this was where the instruction manual would have been so very useful. Another quick glance up and down the hall, and then he said, Magic, are you there? Yes, sir. I think maybe we can forget about the sir business, he said. I didn't mean to offend you or anything, all right? Yes, master. He closed his eyes, then opened them again. The man who was here just now, he said. What happened to him? Master sent him away. Quite, Don said. Now, can you bring him back again, please? No, master. Like when you're hanging off a strap in a tube train and some clumsy idiot elbows you in the pit of the stomach. No, alas, master, it cannot be done. So that was that then. Murder. Just one stupid little passing thought, and he'd killed a man. He hadn't meant to, not really. The trouble is, I didn't realise it was loaded is a pretty poor excuse at the best of times. Is he dead? No, master. Will you please stop calling me that? Yes, boss. He knew he was getting angry, but he couldn't help it. You will address me, he said, without any form of title. Got that? Which meant, of course, that it had won, but that hardly mattered any more. Yes, rumbled the walls and the floor and the ceiling. Smug rumbling is a rare skill, but magic seemed to have a flair for it. Now, back to the matter in hand. He realised he was still standing in the doorway, where anybody passing could see him. He went inside and shut the door. Magic, he said, trying to sound pleasant. If he's gone away, but he's not dead, where is he? No answer. It was, however, a silence he recognised from way back, from school, when the teacher asks you a question to which you ought to know the answer if you've done the homework, but you haven't. So you don't. Do you know where he's gone? He asked. No. This time it was a very subdued rumble, barely a quiver. You sent him somewhere, but you don't know where. The awkward silence that, in the same context as the example above, means yes. At the back of Don's mind, a tiny silver bell tinkled. He asked it to hold the line.
But he's still alive somewhere, he said. You're sure of that?
A faint architectural shudder gave him the impression that magic wasn't 100% proud of itself. A certain degree of embarrassment, maybe even a suggestion of guilt and remorse, and quite right too.
Is he all right, do you think? I mean, has he got food and water?
You don't know, he preempted.
Fair enough, let's move on. Is there any way of finding out where he's got to? Anybody you could ask, perhaps?
The silence that means no, and another fragment of the puzzle dropped into place. Not, unfortunately, the important problem, namely the fate of his upstairs neighbour, the lesser mystery about the nature of magic. He rather thought he might have a line on that.
Magic, he said. Come out here where I can see you.
No apparent movement. He was about to repeat the command when a familiar voice called out.
I'm in here.
From the bedroom. Progress of a sort.
Hang on, I'm coming, he replied. In the bedroom. Where?
Under the bed. Does not compute. There wasn't anything under the bed apart from dust. Dust and his suitcase, and in his suitcase various items from his earlier life, things he couldn't bring himself to bin but which he didn't want to have anywhere where he could see them and be reminded of what they represented. His teddy bear, for example, his Blue Peter badge, stuff like that. He knelt down, pulled out the suitcase, and opened the lid.
In here, right?
Yes. He should have guessed. The voice was coming from his old photo album. The tatty one with racing cars on the front cover. The voice had been familiar because once, long ago, it had been his own. If his theory was correct, and he had a nasty feeling it was, he ought to be able to figure out where to open the album. He turned the pages, stopping every now and again to wince and shrivel at the images of his past self until he found what he was looking for. It was, needless to say, his mother's favourite picture of him, the one she'd had framed on her mantelpiece. He had always hated it. In it he was 7 years old, wearing a bobble hat his gran had knitted, sitting on a bench in the park feeding ducks on a pond. He remembered the day it had been taken. It was the day he'd stopped believing in magic. A small, simple thing. It had happened about an hour after the picture was taken. He'd got it into his head that there were fairies living in the clump of nettles at the bottom of the pub garden. According to well-established precedent, if you gave the fairies sources of bread and milk for a period of 14 days, they were obliged to grant your dearest wish, a games console with joystick and Go-Fest 2 loaded as standard. That day had been the 15th day, and he'd trotted down the garden path with his saucer of milky pap and a review of the console from his computer magazine, just to make sure the fairies had ordered the right model. What? There weren't any fairies after all. He'd trampled about in the nettles, getting stung, trying to flush them out, but all he found was a dead blackbird and next door's cat, predictably irritable about being disturbed. No fairies, no magic. From that moment on, his world had changed forever. Or so he thought at the time. Apparently not. He concentrated on the horrible photo, and after a moment the boy in the stupid bobble hat turned and looked at him. "Hello," said the boy, wretchedly.
"Hello,"
he replied. "You got it worked out, then?"
"Yes."
"Took you long enough?" He ignored that. It was, after all, fair comment. He should have guessed as soon as the room started calling him Sir in that particular tone of voice. It was, of course, his own speciality. He had refined it over an extended period of time to aggravate his parents, teachers at school, anybody who insisted on being shown respect. The same perfectly attuned ear that made him able to write the world's best jingles had led to the creation of the most irritating, sarky, bolshy, snotty voice the human race had ever known. It was brilliant in its way, unique and unmistakable. He should have recognised it instantly the first time he heard it.
"It's me,"
he said.
"isn't it?"
The boy in the picture shrugged. Who else would it be? He said, and Don could see his point. I mean, what did you think it was? Spells and stuff? Put like that, his preconceptions did seem a little bit silly.
"Is that all it is, though? Just believing?"
The boy pulled a scornful face. No, of course not, he replied. Else everybody would do it.
"So, what is it then? The pencil sharpener?"
The boy grinned unpleasantly at him, and he understood for the first time what a particularly loathsome child he must have been. It's not really a pencil sharpener, he said. That's just what you turned it into.
Ah.
Could be anything, the child went on. When Mr. Hwas had it, it was a ring. That sounded a bit more like it, more canonically correct.
So, why a pencil sharpener? Shrug.
Don't ask me. Wasn't my idea. I think having it as a pencil sharpener is really stupid. Time, Don decided, to move on, rather than get bogged down in minutiae.
So, how did I get it?
Another shrug. Don't know, the child replied. Happened before I was awake. You should know. You were there. Don't you remember? A whole new world of respect for his parents. The patience of saints, evidently.
So, he said briskly, I come into possession of this thing, whatever the hell it is, and it starts from there. That's when you
woke up. Yeah, the child really didn't look happy about it. He thought back.
The first thing you did was break my desk.
Sorry. Mechanical, resentful, typical child's apology.
That's quite all right, said Don. So then you fixed the desk.
That's right.
And then you got Polly's dress from wherever.
He paused, frowned.
Exactly where did you get it from?
Not allowed to tell.
Sigh. All right, that's fine. Then I asked you for a £10 note.
Mm-hmm.
Which you took, he went on, from my bank account.
That's right.
He nodded. Because, he said, you didn't know where you were supposed to get it from, and you were afraid of getting in trouble if you took it from someone else.
The child scowled at him. You can't go taking other people's money, it said. That's wrong. It's stealing.
Quite, said Don. We couldn't have that, could we? Whereas sending my upstairs neighbour somewhere, not being able to get him back, that's perfectly all right.
The child looked up. Is it said hopefully.
No, Don replied. It bloody well is not all right. What in God's name were you thinking of?
Nasty look from under the hat. You were the one doing the thinking, it pointed out. Go away, you thought.
Yes, but I didn't mean it.
How am I supposed to know that? He knew the answer to that one.
Because you're me.
Shake of the head, patronising smirk. I was you, or you were me, whatever. Anyway, what that means is you don't think like me any more. Short pause. So it's not my fault, it's yours, right?
Well, to be fair, yes. Tell you what, he said. Instead of getting bogged down in whose fault it was, why don't we concentrate on figuring out how to get him back? Well, how does that sound?
In a sense it was cheating, because he knew how the child's mind worked. Subconsciously. No matter how strenuous or justified its denials, it believed that it had to be to blame for the bad stuff happening, simply because it always had been to blame for everything. Appearing to let it off the hook, therefore, was a sure way to win its heart and mind. Yeah, all right, the child replied. So, how do we do that, then?
I don't know, do I?
He stopped. Just then he'd sounded like, well, a grown-up.
Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to snap at you like that. Only, I'd assumed you'd know. Shake of head. All right, Don said, trying to sound unflustered and unconcerned. Let's try another approach, shall we? What did you do to make him go away?
Magic.
Yes, all right, but what kind of...
I don't know. The child looked away, angry with itself. I don't know how it works. I just think of stuff and it happens, but thinking about bringing him back won't work.
How do you know that?
Tried it. Naturally. The scientific approach even then.
Try it again.
Why, it won't work.
Because I say so.
But he couldn't bring himself to say that, not to himself, so instead he tried.
Please?
All right. The boy in the bobble hat screwed up his slightly faded eyes, pulled a rather vague face, low resolution, cheap and grainy special offer film Dad's crappy old camera, and held it for about 7 seconds. Didn't work. Told you.
Thanks for trying anyway,
he remembered to say, because nobody ever had, and he hated that. Instead they said, you can't have done it right. Do it again.
You got any ideas?
A different kind of thoughtful look. We could try looking it up in the book.
Yes, but I can't read those. Hang on. You can read that stuff.
Disdainful stare. Course I can. I'm not stupid. A few dribbles of relief started to seep through at the seams of his mind.
Excellent. Let's do that then.
Two-dimensional erstwhile Don turned full face and frowned at him. How? The boy was in the photograph. The book was out here in the room.
How about if I held it up for you to see? Would that work?
I suppose it might.
Just as helpful as he remembered himself being. Where do I start? Which page? Shrug.
And then he thought, magic. Open it anywhere and it'll be the right page.
Here,
he said, cutting the pages like a deck of cards and holding the book parallel to the album. He didn't half feel silly doing it, but that apparently was what his life had devolved into.
What does it say? What? Oh, sorry.
He lifted the book away. The child glowered at him, then said, that was a spell for getting rid of warts.
Oh.
You got the wrong page.
Evidently.
He could feel the will to carry on ebbing away. It was all a bit too intense for him, a bit too energetic. What he wouldn't give for a nice lie down. Do you want me to translate it for you? It was a friendly gesture, practically a unilateral declaration of peace. As it was, he only just managed to keep himself from saying something unkind and brusque.
You can do that?
Course I can.
But you said
there wasn't a translation. You didn't ask if I could make one for you. He smiled. It was the only thing he could think of to do.
So I didn't, he said. Silly me. Can you start with the index?
The boy in the photograph nodded. Then, what's an index?
The bit at the back. Lots of names with page numbers next to them.
Oh, that. Hang on. Right. All done. Don flipped through the pages, all still covered with those vaguely malevolent-looking hieroglyphs, until he got to the end. Nothing there he could understand, just, hold on, will you? Don't be in such a rush all the time. The pictograms seemed to smudge, like watercolour when a raindrop falls on it. They blurred, ran, reformed themselves into pixels, into letters.
Magic,
he thought.
You know, it's not right. It shouldn't work.
It ought to take 20 years and a supercomputer to decipher this lot.
Thanks,
he said, as he realised he had no idea what to look for. Try bringing people back, suggested the child. He was about to explain patiently that indexes didn't work like that when he caught sight of one of the entries. Under B. Bringing people back. C under back bringing people. A blank moment. Then he said,
I see. The book's not real, it's just...
He scrabbled in his head for what he actually wanted to say.
It's just an externalization of what's in your mind.
The child gave him a classic, well, if you're gonna use long words, look, and said, you going to read what it says, or what?
Page 743. Of course, all the page numbers were still pictograms. He pointed this out and got looked at for his trouble, but it did get him proper Arabic numerals at the foot of each page. Got it. When you're ready. Page 743, of course, did the blurring and refocusing bit, and he was looking at a page of normal English text with a bold subheading about a third of the way down, bringing people back, under which the single word, can't. What do they say? Don't focus on what you can't do, focus on what you can do. But it's a bit difficult to focus on what you can do when all you can do is can't. If that makes any sense. I don't know. When the only word is can't, there's no such word as can, but you can't have a word can't without the word can. Goodness me. What did you have particular idioms that people would use to you when you were growing up? Like, I always got like, there's no such word as can't. And then you'd be like, what the flip's that in the dictionary then? Anyway, I digress. Did you have any idioms? Do you have an idiom that you like to use? Tell me what idiom you like to use. Moreover, let me know how you're doing. How are you all doing? How are things? Are you enjoying the weather? Have you got good weather, bad weather? I know I keep asking about the weather, but I do like to look at the weather. I like cloud watching. I like seeing the weather fronts come in. I've got a good view of that from my window. I can see all the weather fronts coming in over the horizon. It's quite pretty, actually. Do you know there's such a thing as the Cloud Watching Society? Yeah, been a member for years. But anyway, I'm going to hopefully over the next week or so be recording just a couple of extra bits and bobs, a couple of extra narratives that I've received, and hopefully we'll be able to start off a series of telling little stories that you guys have sent in. Whether it's 1, 2, 3 or more, at least we'll be sending something, or we'll be making something. I'm really tired. How are you doing? How are you? How is life? Did I ask that already? I think I did. Yes. Anywho. So, yes, by all means, just have a little bit of banter in the comments section. I always love hearing from you, as you know. If you can hit the notifications bell, that is awesome. If you can hit the like if you enjoyed this chapter, please do. By all means, have a bit banter in the comments. I think I've already said that. And if you want to subscribe and share, that's even better. So the last one we did was Rhubarb and Custard, which was a wonderfully chaotic theme tune. It was awesome. Right, I've got one for you. He's the greatest. He's fantastic. Whenever there is danger, he'll be there. He's the ace. He's amazing. He's the strongest. He's the quickest. He's the best. Can you remember that tune? Please excuse me singing it. It's very difficult without the music going trumpeting on behind it. But do you remember that tune? No cheating. No cheating and looking up the lyrics. No. Step away from Google. So, anybody that can guess it? GenXers, if you don't guess it, I will be very ashamed of you. And I'll take my bat and ball and go on. But yeah. Do you know that tune? It was a BBC animated series in the 80s. Yes, and I'll give you a hint. It wasn't Banana Man, and whoever thought that was a good idea for the name of a children's cartoon was not thinking right. It was very funny, though. Okay, then. So, please excuse that terrible a cappella, but yes. Can you tell me which cartoon that was? I will be back in a couple of days, hopefully, pollen allowing and weather allowing. And yes, take it easy. Make sure you rest well. Look after yourself. Self-care is number one priority as always. And thank you all for being here and coming back every couple of days. I really do appreciate it. And as I said, hit that like button. Hit that like button. Thank you. Appreciate you. Din 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 din. Ta-da! I try.